You fool! Warren is dead.
The House of Cards, a Thomas Chadwick story, by Malcolm Ferguson. Now this Madame Jumel was a dark lady, or at least she aspired to be, from the moment she cast off the name of Alice Lemming and appropriated the name once held by a friend of Aaron Burr. Thus Thomas Chadwick began the evening's discussion. We had just put in a strenuous day packing old man Parmalee down from Hanson Mountain, after he had spent the night in the woods up there with a broken leg, and I was glad to stay overnight with Chadwick, the Englishman, whose newly acquired ark of a house was plunged in the woods on the old, disused road over Tumble-Down Dick. So, with considerable relief at a search and rescue job well done, and the veteran woodsman Parmalee restored to safety, I could turn my attention with interest to the facts that were agitating the mind of my friend, and the hot rum toddy he provided. She owned this house, you know, and for a while in the 1880s and 90s took in boarders. She liked the pretense of being a woman of mystery, dealt in clairvoyance, ectoplasmic emanations, and all that. I don't think she fully realized her opportunities, however. Surely this ghastly old house alone, or that pack of tarot cards on the table, should be enough, in the hands of a capable spook artist, to give her the prestige she desired. Chadwick was right. The old house was a monstrosity which would take a lot of altering. It had been built in the 1850s, when dark brown stain was in vogue for the woodwork, and hundreds of board feet of fretwork had supplanted the honest, simple lines of earlier craftsmanship. Undoubtedly, the shades had been drawn to protect the parlor furniture from fading, and antimacassars, cluttered corner whatnots, and decorated kerosene lamps under the guise of good taste overcrowded the room, making one feel shut in and ill at ease, creating an apprehension which is part of that insidious, intangible feeling, our sometime fear, of old houses. "Yes, I've seen pictures of the old gal," I ventured. She had soot-black hair drawn back sharply in a way that didn't do her features justice, and it's also true that her features would have appeared to better advantage if she had known how to smile, and not kept her lips in a thin line. Those black dresses of hers were certainly severe, too, but didn't a rumpus about death and insanity go along with her? "Right on the noggin, old boy," said Chadwick gleefully, making his knuckles crack by way of being excited. "These 2 folio volumes have been giving me a good deal on the matter." He held up 2 bound notebooks stuffed with papers and dust begrimed. "I was lightening up this front parlor woodwork when I noticed that the bottom shelf of the corner cupboard lifts out," he explained. "Lord, what a find. Does this make her out to have been a murderer?" "Well, yes and no. Let's reconstruct the whole affair with now and then a bit of help from these volumes. Then we can judge better." In the spring of 1882, when she fell heir to this place, the Tumble-Down Dick Road was used quite a lot more than it is now, even if the railroad from Boston was already drawing traffic around by Tavistock. For 2 years she lived here by herself, wrapped in her exclusive interests and sheltered by the funereal spruce trees that flanked the south and east faces of the house. In 1884 came financial troubles, brought on by the New York bank failings, apparently. She must have been hard hit, because in less than a year she was planning to take in boarders. Yes, boarders, profaning the temple of her house, laughing at her behind her back, running the curtains way up, disarraying the antimacassars, pulling her back from the spirit world to get coffee or toast, occupying the bathroom, and lounging about in her parlor. The unhappiness of reduced circumstances cast a pall of gloom about this dark lady, Madame Jumel. In spite of her sombre mien, exacting habits, burnt toast, and cold coffee, and above all in spite of the house itself, boarders came. The west room, with its view of the White Mountains, was more expensive, whereas the east room, over this room, her front parlor, was hemmed in by the trees, now providently gone. The upstairs bedroom must have been cold and moist and uninviting, bearing in itself all that was wrong, all that was outcast of soul about boarding-houses. With the snuffing of the oil lamp, the room was engulfed by the darkness of a raven's wing, an ominous atmosphere with an implicit nevermore, or a Votan's warning of a black doom due, a heaviness which seemed to be awaiting that horrible apparition known in the language of my Scotch schoolmaster as the Boneless. One fall evening, Madame Jumel fetched a French-Canadian crone from Tavistock up to witness some spiritualistic manifestations. Tante Marie was the best audience Madame Jumel could get sometimes, though she often proved disappointing to her hostess. Madame Jumel might perform at a séance with the distraught airs of Lady Macbeth, to find afterwards that her guest was quite unruffled. "These are just spirit," she would nod. "I see them often. They tell me their troubles. Yes, yes. But what is that book with the black shadow over it?" Madame Jumel's diary would splutter at this, calling Tante Marie a superstitious old fool, illiterate and unappreciative, and much more in the same vein. True enough, Tante Marie did not have much book learning, but what she had learned from was folklore, instinct, and word of mouth. What puzzled and vexed Madame Jumel particularly was Tante Marie's belief that a book, a house, or some other inanimate object could be a sinister talisman, more than that even, a potent force in itself. Here, let me read you a passage from her diary about this Tante Marie. "Rode down today and picked up Tante Marie in Frenchtown. She had heard that I had a pack of tarot cards at the house and wanted to see them. I told her how I had bought them from a bookshop in Riversmouth, just after a sailor had brought them in. Stole them from a gypsy, huh? Well, maybe. They're real old, 16th century probably, and have 22 symbols of Atu, besides 56 other cards more or less like ours. During the ride, I couldn't seem to interest Tante Marie in my Ouija board contact at all. The cards were all that interested her. When we arrived at the house, however, she became quite uneasy. 'It's full,' she said. I couldn't imagine what she meant. 'The house. It's full. You had better not practice tonight or any more here. Bad, bad luck, death, blood. Too long you have practiced here already. Full, like sparks in a cat's fur. Soon it will be stronger than you.' With her hawk's face, beady eyes, and sharp, cackling voice, Tante Marie set me on edge tonight. Finally, I persuaded her to stay long enough to see the cards, whose mere physical form conveyed a dark force to the old woman. The only boarder, Horace Tolliver, seemed to be interested in them also, and folded his newspaper as I brought them to the parlor table. He apparently came into some money somewhere along the line, but it doesn't seem to give him much pleasure now. He just seems to wander around like someone extra, like the Joker in a deck of cards maybe, separate and different. The three of us examined the cards, looking especially at the Atu, or symbols, death, temperance, the hermit, Pope Joan, Le Pendu, a dead man hanged by one leg and in chains, 22 in all. Tante Marie examined them all with misgivings at the portent she saw in them. 'Choose the card of your destiny,' I offered. 'No,' she replied. 'Not yet, I guess. Besides, I don't like the feel of this house. No, it would choose, not me. That would be no good.' Mr. Tolliver could not keep his curiosity back, and said, 'Choose one for me, then, and tell me what it means.' She gave him a sharp look, an examination with her eyes slitted. Knowing her, I suspected she didn't like something she saw in him. Many time it is better not to know, but you do not believe, so choose if you like. With a convulsive move, she thrust the deck toward him. He shuffled and drew the Wheel of Fortune. 'Ha!' said Tante Marie. 'You figure this one yourself. Didn't it turn once for you? It will turn once more against you.' Mr. Tolliver wilted at this turn of affairs, and mumbled his thanks for the fortune-telling. Shortly afterward, he went up to bed. I rebuked Tante Marie for her bluntness. But Madame Jumel, the card does not lie, and I cannot hide fate. After that, I couldn't interest Tante Marie in a spiritual manifestation. She was too engrossed with Mr. Tolliver and the card he drew, or as she insisted, the house drew for him. So I drove her back earlier than usual. Chadwick closed the book and explained that the room over the parlour in which we sat was the room to which Mr. Horace Tolliver had retired, the room flanked with spruce trees, its darkness having a dense atmosphere enfolding one like the black fluid some sea creatures exude. With its brown-stained rococo woodwork, its overstuffed furniture, and its ponderous oak bed with a canopy, it gave one the shut-in feeling of the claustrophobe, as if the air were denser, darker, a malevolent, sentient thing in itself. It was about 3 in the morning when 2 shots rang through that chamber. Madame Jumel, in bathrobe, thrust at the door, and finally, in desperation, fetched an axe and, swinging wildly, battered down the door. In the room, a flickering oil lamp revealed Mr. Horace Tolliver sprawled on the floor with a bullet through his temple. The scene Chadwick described was immediate to me, being directly overhead. A lamp, possibly the same one, was our only source of light, and I needed only to take it in hand and climb the stairs to see the room as it was when the body was found. Chadwick's interior decorating had not yet reached the 2nd floor. The suicide left a note, a hasty, distracted scrawl that sheds all the light on the crime that we need. But what possessed Madame Jumel to put this note in her diary instead of surrendering it to the authorities, who were soon on the scene? Perhaps her character suggests an answer. The fascination of this all-revealing note was too great for her, at the expense of little or no incrimination to herself, for it was obviously a suicide. She could hold the key to the crying mystery of why. Silently, Chadwick handed me the loose sheets from the diary. Will it not end? This house, this room, this bed, that Canuck witch-woman? What madness! Is there no peace after all these years? Never before has it been so bad, but now the whole crime is before me, around me. I came up to bed with that wheel of fortune on my mind, haunted by the fact that a wheel is round, and so is a well, and that my fortune began with a well. I was Miss Emily's handyman then, 20 years ago, a young fool covetous of her riches. Wasn't money all I needed to make Jeanette my wife? Doubly a fool for that. But tonight there is no sleep. In the deep dark of this room, dark enough to make one pale, lying in bed, a fearful sensation overcame me. I was spinning backwards and inwards down a long spiral darkness. I opened my eyes and sat up. I was sure the utterly black room was going round me. Had I eaten or drunk immoderately? Surely not. Never since my crime had I taken a drink. I haven't dared. Good God, I exclaimed softly, and the sound echoed back, I swear it, a mocking, hollow horror that could only have come from the depths of a well. Then all sensation of being in bed left me, and I felt myself bruised and numb, but strangely dry, in the bottom of a well. I reached out, sand, cobwebs, cold rock. At last a glimmer of light, a faint trace only. My hands gripped into the sand in spite of me. I was looking up from the dry bottom of a well, up the rough stones to the top, and the supreme horror there, leaning over and obscuring the light of day, was the old lady, Miss Emily, wet and dead, just as she was when her body was hauled out. I closed my eyes and thrust my hands before them. Could I not shut out this vision? I dared not stir and feel the sand, the cold stone. Slowly a spider crawled up my back, threading beads of sweat on the web it trailed. And then a voice, not from a well, but from the outside, the unrestricted open air, remote, far off. Did you win your girl with my money, Horace Tolliver? Why did I cry, no, no? Was it to hear my own voice echo back emptily down the round well-side? Have my worldly goods brought you happiness, Horace Tolliver? My sobs echoed back. I could not contain them. Answer me. No, no, never. What horrors this night brings. Forming, reforming, mocking. Miss Emily, said I, today I'm going to fix your well, clean it and stone it up. It's about time, she said. Come out and show me how you think it should be. And then I was holding her atilt over the coping by her scrawny black-stockinged ankles, and she was pleading for her life. Most of her money was in her mattress, and it would be mine, she squealed. It will indeed, I grated. She howled as she plunged headfirst to splash in the waters below. Then silence and darkness, until at last the crazily twisted figure broke the waters. How did I get the bedroom floor under my feet, or find a match, or light this lamp? What is forcing me to write? I can see my pistol by my left hand. In a moment I will clutch it and turn around. I know that Miss Emily will be standing there. I know it. As I put down the paper, Chadwick remarked that Miss Emily must indeed have been waiting, since Tolliver's first bullet was embedded in the wainscot where he had turned and fired it. I could see for myself, if I chose, where the mark was. As you can imagine, Chadwick assured me Madame Jumel walked on eggs for a while, after Tolliver's death. Her views didn't seem to approach Tante Marie's appreciably, however, and her rationale of the Tolliver death was long and involved with spiritualistic abracadabra, influences of the zodiac, and much more in her cluttered diary. She did manage to get the big oak bed moved out of the room, and an iron bed put in its place, not a radical improvement, but a step in the right direction. Madame Jumel's business was quite brisk following the suicide. The notoriety seems to have helped rather than hindered. It was undoubtedly notoriety that brought flashy Milton Digby to the Maison Jumel. Digby looked more like a gambler than a banker, but could this be a rebuke to our too ready observations? That he was young, dapper, and a man of leisure with no tangible evidence of a bank's problems touching him at all was more apparent. Madame Jumel described him as a jaunty man with a wide, toothy smile, and suspected that Milton Digby was becoming enamored of her. The one other boarder, a deaf old lady, came in handy as a foil, Madame Jumel gleefully recalled in her diary. Whether all this was in the old girl's imagination, whether Digby was really smitten, or whether he had an ulterior motive, was not then evident. But this was only the third day of his stay, and one paid by the week, so even the color of his money was hidden. Tante Marie had come to the house several times since the suicide. The old woman had watched with polite patience a séance of Madame Jumel's, never really put out by the spirits that appeared, as if she were quite familiar, even bored, perhaps, with the whole crew. Madame Jumel would be annoyed at this for a while, until her mounting desire for an audience outweighed her annoyance, unless Tompkins, who helped out around, hitched up Bessie, and once again she would fetch Tante Marie. This evening Tante Marie wanted to examine the tarot cards again, her fascination with Madame Jumel's strange books having been worn out in earlier visits. So, with some diffidence, Madame Jumel produced them. Their undeniable fascination was more than an excuse to bring Milton Digby to the spot. Neither woman gave any evidence of desiring his presence or hearing his remarks as Tante Marie examined the cards. The Chariot, L'Amoureux, Pope Joan, The Last Judgment, and all the rest. What could have made Madame Jumel ask him to take his choice? No sooner were the words out of her mouth than the back of her hand covered it. There were times when Madame Jumel puzzled herself. "I would be delighted to find fortune in your eyes," said Mr. Digby with alacrity. "Nothing for it but to fan out the 56 regular tarot cards plus the 22 Atu." Mr. Digby promptly selected a card. It was the Juggler. "Ha! Le Battleur!" the crone cackled. "What accounts for this, Mr. Banker?" "Why, I must be the victim of fate's jugglery," he stammered lamely, looking at the card which gave him the lie. for on it appeared a Pierre blandly accepting accolades for his jugglery well done. A strange consternation had caught up with Digby, and there was nothing to do but withdraw and gather his forces. He had taken the room upstairs in which Tolliver had died. Judging from the long pause between the thud of the first shoe and its mate overhead, Digby was thinking, harder than he would like to have it appear. At about 2 a.m, Madame Jumel awoke to hear screams and the sound of Digby thrashing violently. "You can't take it back," he screamed, and the bed was shaken violently. "It's mine now. Don't think for a minute this cage is going to hold me. You—" What was Madame Jumel to do? Was this an ordinary nightmare? If so, how could she deal with it? "Drop that, Stevens. Drop it, I say. If you don't, I'll break open a bank scandal that'll make headlines up and down the West Coast. It's mine. Mine. Every cent of it." And he began sobbing and shaking the bed again. "Mr. Digby, do you hear me? Mr. Digby, are you all right? Nothing's going to hurt you. You're safe, among friends," Madame Jumel called, rattling the doorknob with both hands as her boarder became wilder, more distraught. Surely he could no longer be dragged by a nightmare. Suppose he were awake? And she fell to shaking the doorknob again. There was a moment's silence. Then the voice began again in a lower register. $25,000 and all mine. A little lesson in honesty doesn't pay, Mr. Stevens. Nice of you to lend me the money. I've been in that teller's cage long enough. There's more money in being silent than being a teller, Mr. Bank President Stevens? His laughter became madder by the minute. This had been going on for nearly an hour, when Madame Jumel dressed and went for help. At 5 o'clock, 2 husky neighbors burst in the bedroom door and found Digby unconscious, gripping the iron bars at the foot of his bed. Pale, disheveled, and in a cold sweat, he was taken off to the hospital, strapped in a blanket lest he became violent. At the hospital, where he remained delirious, an effort was made to find his next of kin. With clues from his belongings and from his insane gibberings, it was soon established that 10 years previous he had been a bank teller in San Francisco, who had fled after the suicide of the bank president. The suicide note of the president, Mr. Stevens, confessed embezzlement and named Digby as a blackmailer. Barely enough money was found among Digby's belongings to pay for a week's board. He never recovered his sanity. Chadwick anticipated my question. No, Madame Jumel had not found any money among Digby's possessions, he felt, citing her diary's frank acknowledgment of a vain search. No, the money had probably ebbed away like sand in a glass, leaving Digby desperately hard up and a fugitive as well. For a while, Madame Jumel closed off her ill-fated bedroom, dropped Tante Marie from her friendship, and limited her spiritualistic explorations. She even intended to dispose of the tarot cards, but this was too much. Gradually she recovered her equanimity, however, and soon the room was opened again, and in it slept Mr. A. Morris Shumway, a retired realtor. But at least it cannot be said that Madame Jumel didn't warn him of the room's past. Mr. Shumway had the mouth of a guppy, making silent O's all the while Madame Jumel spoke. Before she had ended, indeed, he was off. "Yes, Madame Jumel, I understand. I understand perfectly. After my own bereavement, I cannot help but understand how these matters affect one. My wife, Madame Jumel, was lost to me just 4 years ago, in such a terrible manner that it has left me sensitive to all such misfortunes. Poor dear Elsie was burned to death at our cottage on Square Lake. One wouldn't have to be as self-centered as Madame Jumel was to look askance at this stout, bald man who burdened you with his sad story before the ink had dried on the guest book. No, anyone might fear lest these doleful details be told and retold until the last bill was paid. Nevertheless, painful though this story might become in repetition, Madame Jumel would listen eagerly to the first telling, since for her the slow pace of the funeral hack had all the fascination of the fast pace of the fire horses. We were up at the camp late in the fall that year. One Monday I got up early to walk to the station and take the train back to Boston. Less than 8 hours after I had left Larchborough Crossing, I received word at my office that our cottage had burned and Elsie in it. Naturally, I hastened to Square Lake as quickly as I could. The terrible news was true, however. Nothing remained of our cottage but the big stone chimney. Elsie had died before the Larchborough fire apparatus had even been hitched up. It was horrible. Madame Jumel expressed her sympathy, but was soon off to open the room and prepare it for occupancy. The first 3 nights of Mr. Shumway's occupancy were uneventful, though he complained of sleeping poorly and of the room's stuffiness. But since he complained of everything else, with whinings and peevishness, all the while feeding himself on nerve pills, Madame Jumel didn't set much store by his more justifiable complaints. On the 4th day, Madame Jumel came into her parlour suddenly, to find Mr. Shumway examining her tarot cards. He looked up with a startled, rabbity expression. "Really, Mr. Shumway, I wish—" "Oh dear, I hope you don't mind, Madame Jumel," he expostulated. "I'm simply fascinated with these old cards." "You shouldn't get into my personal property, Mr. Shumway. You know that." He overlooked her remark completely. "I just chose a card, and really I don't know whether it's good or bad. It's the sun. Tell me, please, is that good, Madame Jumel?" "I couldn't tell you. Put those cards back where they belong." "Oh, very well. The sun does sound like a nice card, even if I've been terribly afraid of fire ever since my wife died. It was so horrible." This association of ideas between the fate of Shumway's wife and this card did not seem close to Madame Jumel. Could she have missed some important point of association that was in Shumway's mind, or did he always excite himself with far-fetched associations surrounding his wife's death? That evening, Shumway was quieter than usual, and retired early. Later that night, Madame Jumel awoke to hear once again noises from that fatal room. Shumway was coughing in a peculiar, half-choked fashion. Madame Jumel stirred angrily in her bed, and finally settled to listen to the latest boarder's discomfort. It was then that she heard Mr. Shumway's voice between coughs, a voice turned to a bleat with deathly fear. She arose and went to the battered, patched door of the guest chamber. First came a bout of coughs, then, "Oh God, smoke!" Then there was a long pause as the coughing died away. Madame Jumel was about to go back to bed when the voice of Shumway came again, abruptly, tensely. "Elsie, what are you doing? Why can't I move? Listen to me, Elsie, dear. You shouldn't tie me up like this, even for a joke. For the love of God, what are you pouring on my mattress? Kerosene? And that burning glass and those matches, what does it all mean? Come back, Elsie, come back. I'll never— Elsie!" Then he was silent. Madame Jumel listened, but nothing more could be heard. She went back to her room to turn over in her mind the strange nightmare that troubled her boarder. Finally, she fell asleep. The next forenoon, Shumway did not appear. There were 2 other boarders, both older women who had heard Shumway but didn't trouble themselves in the matter. Shortly after noon, Madame Jumel's anxiety became apparent. After calling a number of times at Shumway's door, she asked a young man who was fishing nearby and Tompkins, the neighbor who helped with the heavy work, to open the door. They quickly cracked open a panel and turned the key in the lock. Shumway lay stiffly in bed, with the front of his nightgown torn open. He was dead. His hands were convulsed about his bare throat. Dr. Sproul came, and hazarded the belief that death was due to a heart attack. The case puzzled him, however, and Madame Jumel heard, or thought she heard, him mutter something about symptom matter of asphyxiation to be looked into. This third misfortune was too much for the boarders, curious or otherwise, and Madame Jumel was soon forced to suspend her activities. Suspicions had been aroused, either by the doctor's indiscreet admission of strange misgivings, or by the two old ladies who would not spend another night in that terrible house. They whispered of having heard Madame Jumel tiptoe to Shumway's door the night he died. Was killed, they said. Since Madame Jumel had not been officially questioned on that subject, nor ventured to say she had been attracted to listen at Shumway's door, this sounded strongly against her in the old lady's whisperings. Much more was spoken, libellous and nearly so, hinting that Madame Jumel had engineered these misfortunes. Some thought for money, some thought out of an obsession. Only Tante Marie spoke out against this opinion. To her it was all brought about by that infernal house and by those diabolical cards. That was the way she saw it. Madame Jumel's diary does condemn her on one point, however. Here is the quotation. All yesterday morning a ghastly suspicion was working in my mind that Mr. Shumway would be found dead. But I would have to wait before having the room opened. Not one word did I say of what I had heard him utter in the night, only that from my room I had heard him having a nightmare. At last the hour became sufficiently late for me to show alarm. Then Madame Jumel goes on to tell of the discovery. But listen to this. As soon as Tompkins left to fetch Dr. Sproul, I went into the room, ostensibly to cover the body, but instead I went straight to Shumway's luggage. In the bottom of his black bag I found 4 bundles of bills. Hastily I transferred them to an old shawl. Where could I hide them? The old stove flue, of course. Hastily I pulled off the metal cover, crammed the shawl and its contents onto the narrow brick ledge, and replaced the cover. And then, when the house was empty of guests, Madame Jumel retrieved the bills. Nearly $4,000 she had. No longer would she be troubled with boarders. Now she could live as she wished. At least that is what she thought. But with her boarders gone, there came to her a loneliness. She prowled about the house restlessly. Spiritualism seemed to her a mockery now. She wrote in her diary of all this, and of her desire to be rid of the tarot cards. She would burn them, in fact. But nothing came of it, until one night in midwinter she got out the tarot cards for the last time. With them before her, she renewed her resolution to destroy them, her pen fairly digging the pages of her diary in her determination. Again she wavered, and succumbed to a strange temptation. How did it come about? What quirk of the gambler's mind caused her to draw a card? At any rate, draw one she did. For later, when she was found dead in a snowdrift well down the unploughed road to Tavistock, crumpled in her frozen hand was a tarot card, the House of Destruction. Chadwick turned to look at me enigmatically. "Well, my friend, the hour is late. Would you rather sleep upstairs or down?" Mr. Hyde and Seek, a Thomas Chadwick story, by Malcolm Ferguson. From the way you describe it, Doctor, the Orne place does indeed sound as if it had a poltergeist bouncing around inside it, Thomas Chadwick reflected, turning the nutmeg grounds about in the tumbler in his gaunt, weather-stained hand. Which is, of course, more readily said than settled. For how does one cope with such a critter? Assuming that Eliza Blaine is host, or hostess rather, for this manifestation, should she and it be treated according to the concepts which the psychologists use when they so gingerly deal with such a phenomenon, or in terms of the specialists in psychic affairs? For my part, sir, if I were more deeply involved, I'd try neither, but record any phenomena in simple terms and try to settle in my own mind enough of their nature to warrant an attempt to break them up. Good, good. Now we can start from the beginning. with some idea what the term poltergeist means to you? Yes, sometimes strange supernormal happenings occur in the vicinity of an adolescent, which come to be attributed to the operation of an alien power, directing agent, elemental force, or what you will, upon his victim's personality. The picture is that of a hermit crab in the shell of a periwinkle, only here the same skull quarters are shared simultaneously by an alternately dominant and dormant power and victim. The psychologist is on a spot, since this setup would be duck soup for a Freudian explanation if it weren't for the recorded hell-raisings outside of the subject's accomplishments. Such unaccountable but recurrent pranks as a deluge of stones, strange peltings which explain the German name poltergeist, pelting ghost, and a variety of caprices worthy of a Puck or a kobold. I refilled Chadwick's glass and my own, taking the hot water with which to dilute the rum from a kettle in a chimney niche built a century back for this purpose. But the hell of it is, the symptoms are external to the subject, Chadwick argued, and the credibility of such evidence must be tested before we can establish a satisfactory attitude regarding the poltergeist. I was just agreeing with my elderly friend when a car's headlights swept Chadwick's window. "That's probably Oliver Orne now," I commented, going to the door. Orne was a strong, wiry man in his late 40s. He greeted Chadwick and explained that he had learned of my whereabouts from the switchboard operator, who habitually rerouted the calls of my practice at my request. "Mr. Chadwick and I were just talking about your ward's case. He has lived and worked in many parts of the world, and exercised common sense on plenty of problems which would stump a young country doctor like myself." Chadwick cut my eulogy with an epithet of mock contempt, and turned inquiringly to Orne. "Well, what I came for is this. Eliza went up to bed about 9, while my wife and I sat in the kitchen listening to the radio. Just after Eliza went upstairs, the radio began to static badly, so I turned it off. I went on reading the newspaper, but noticed that everything was real quiet, the sounds Eliza made getting ready for bed sounding miles away. Suddenly she screamed. Then we heard scraping noises ending in a loud crash. I ran upstairs as fast as I could, and found the kid fainted across her bed, with all the furniture drawn in a heap around her. The dresser, chairs, the heavy linen chest. I don't see how it happened." We sat quietly for a minute or so. Then he turned to me. "Dr. Huntley, I want you to come stay with us until we can find some way to stop these goings-on." "Why, I'd be glad to. Only I don't know about such things. Doctors don't— Perhaps we can find some psychologist," I stammered. "No, I don't want an outsider," Orne replied. "Maybe we can cook up some arrangement for you to stay at the house without arousing any suspicion. That would be best." After some discussion, I agreed to this arrangement, with the excuse that repairs to my house made boarding out easier for me. As I could promise no results, I made my fee low, and only chargeable if something favorable were achieved. So that evening I started a case daybook, carefully avoiding technical terms which would influence diagnosis. I give you herewith an abridged version of this case history, day by day. Disturbance at the Orne place. June 3rd, 1949. The homestead is a 2.5-story frame building with an L, a typical New England farmhouse. Built a century and a half ago, it appears to be in sound condition. The hand-hewn timbers, tenon and mortise and trunnel-fitted, the pine panelling throughout downstairs acknowledge this antiquity, and conceivably help provide whatever susceptibility may be needed for psychic manifestations. It is neither extremely isolated or otherwise, though it would appear so to a city dweller, for 75 yards separate it from the nearest neighbors. The location on the edge of Whitaker Intervale, against the wooded slopes of Dawn Mountain, would be agreeable, though lonely in winter when the sun goes down early in the afternoon. Anne Orne, Oliver's wife, is a small, energetic woman who does a great deal of work, though with all the stir of a wren in a dust bath. Oliver also is a worker, running his own extensive farm and hiring out with his tractor and other farm and lumbering machinery. Eliza Blaine is an attractive, well-bred girl of 15, with large brown eyes and brown hair. Judging by her voice and manners, she would appear to be of an even, genial disposition, without perceptible neurotic tendencies, surely. She had been adopted the summer before, following the death of her father, a distant relative of Mrs. Orne. Before coming to Whitaker-Intervale, she had lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where her father had given her a number of benefits in education and upbringing. The first occurrence prior to my arrival at the Orne place was in April. Eliza had just bidden her foster parents good night at the door leading from the kitchen, which shuts off the back stairs and prevents draughts from dispelling the heat in winter. Oliver saw the door shut and heard the girl's footsteps ascending the stairs. Then, half a beat behind them, another footstep started up. Eliza was nearly at the top of the stairs before Oliver gathered his wits and opened the door. She was alone there, turning to look down at him beneath the bare light bulb. Her face wore a strange, devilish smile, compounded of mockery, yet fearfully, terribly alien. Oliver stood dumbfounded, turning over in his mind whether Eliza had somehow prankishly skipped upstairs, but was unable to fit this deviltry with her character. So he ended up staring gape-jawed until she turned, snapping off the light, and proceeding in the dark to the next light switch just inside her room. When Oliver turned back into the kitchen, his wife looked up, nonplussed from her darning. Their discussion made no headway with the matter, partly perhaps since Oliver somehow omitted telling his wife of Eliza's strange expression. They concluded that this might have been a freak of sound involving the wood frame of the old house, and called to mind reports of similar happenings. In the latter part of May, on a rainy afternoon, the minister, Mr. Brainerd, came to call. Mrs. Orne was in the kitchen frying doughnuts, while Eliza was washing clothes, using set tubs and a washing machine in the L, also connected to the kitchen by a door. Mrs. Orne naturally exclaimed regarding the condition of the house, her hair and dress, while Mr. Brainerd climbed from his car. Nevertheless, after shedding these fluttering preliminaries of a parishional call, she had settled Mr. Brainerd, a young, easy-going fellow, over coffee, fresh doughnuts, and discreet gossip. He sat facing the open L door, where Eliza was continuing her work. His coffee cup was halfway to his lips, which were pursed with intent to retract if the liquid proved too hot, when a cake of soap floated through the air, coming from the L, and swinging in a near 90-degree arc to settle in the soap dish by the kitchen sink. That was one cup of coffee Mr. Brainerd did not drink. Several minutes later, when Mr. Brainerd and Anne Orne looked into the L, they found Eliza caught by nervous laughter, badly convulsed, apparently from the effort of her performance. Indeed, the two mystified witnesses had to put her on the front room couch and minister to her with damp cloths, smelling salts, or whatever they thought best. There was no trace of the diabolical about her expression then. On recovering, she claimed she knew nothing of the episode, being quite unable to explain her attack of hysteria. With this episode, the story took form and spread through the community. I was called in, though my examination brought nothing positive to light. For the record, the story that the doughnuts in the bowl on the kitchen table flew onto the coat hangers against the kitchen wall is the invention and whole cloth embroidery of some absent party, a village loafer probably, for both Mr. Brainerd and Anne Orne deny any such occurrence. June 6th, 1949. In return for a couple of weeks with a limited practice, I had to put in more time at the hospital. Evenings were more apt to be free, and so far I have managed to be on hand most evenings, though nothing has yet happened during my stay. This evening, the four of us were seated at the kitchen table reading, or in Eliza's case, writing a letter to a Portsmouth chum. A mouse had been scampering in the walls, though I had not been particularly conscious of it, until I happened to notice Eliza reflecting a moment over her letter. I could almost see her attention caught by the creature's slight scuttlings and squeakings. Perhaps a sudden muffling of the atmosphere was responsible, as if a focus of attention of some sort were being established. Then all at once, Eliza's face changed, taking on the wholly tense, preoccupied expression of a cat about to spring. A full, taut minute thus, and then she gave a slight forward thrust, just the shadow of a lunge, I would call it. From the wall a shrill, agonized mouse cry piped. The Orns looked up in surprise at the blank wall and its hidden, strangely racked victim. Neither Eliza nor I turned a heeding head, I, of course, being concerned with her reaction. While I think I must yield my medical judgment and say she acted as one possessed, as if the person within her personality were supplanted, her mind being temporarily tenanted by a diabolical force. No, this poltergeist is no mere prankster's connivance. A moment following the mouse's last cry, soon reached in rapid diminuendo, Eliza thrust the very tip of her tongue briefly between her teeth, and in doing so seemed to be released to herself and regain her own personality. Seeing the three of us watching her, rather than the blank wall behind, which was a still mouse, she shook her head slightly. "Gosh, I must have dozed off. I feel awfully tired. I didn't snore, did I?" I assured her that she hadn't, that we were merely looking up because we thought we had heard a mouse in the wall. "Yes, I guess I must have heard him scampering around. Funny, you hear a noise like that and hardly realize it." Shortly after that, she retired for the night. June 7th, 1949. I've been thinking a good deal today about the human brain as an organ. Now, the heart is fairly plainly a pump. One can comprehend its function upon inspecting it, as in dissection, and so on with all the other organs. Their functions can be readily comprehended upon examination. But the mass of grey matter which comprises the brain cannot be thus comprehended as the source of thought process. One cannot see where or how this viscera-like mass permits one to pilot an airplane and carry on a conversation at the same time, or to cope with a novel problem such as the present one of conjecture concerning poltergeists. Since we cannot yet look into the brain and get very far by induction, all we know about it is what we feel and experience ourselves, or what we observe in others. Therefore, I conclude, if phenomenal accomplishments are directed by the brain, of which the brain's possessor is wholly unaware, the fact that these functions were directed by the brain would defy detection. Thus, for example, the recent experiments at Duke University with cards regarding mental telegraphy, or the age-old business of making a divining rod indicate the subterrene presence of water, these in the human brain, or the homing instinct in the pigeon's brain, suggest that certain functions of the brain may exceed anything we have yet ascertained. Putting it another way, if we say, "I think, therefore I am," the "I am" cannot directly challenge or enlarge upon the "I think." And if an unaccounted relationship between forces of the mind and external objects and conjecturably forces in the environment exists, there's simply no telling of it. June 11th, 1949. Whatever it is, it's getting stronger, growing like a malignant tumor. Each successful exercise of dominance over Eliza's mind increases the power of the next manifestation, which may be less capricious and not content with a mouse for a victim. That Eliza is possessed by a malevolent entity or grotesque preternatural schism of split personality, or whatever in hell it can be called, for it is surely spawned of hell, is apparent to me, whether my terms fit the textbooks or not. Eliza and I started the evening with a game of checkers. This would prove diverting, while keeping me posted on her mental state. She sat in the chair Reverend Brainerd had occupied, facing the L, the kitchen sink. This is from the chair occupant's left to right, a window into the area of front yard which might be called the L courtyard. We played across a corner of the full-sized table in order to reach the board readily. Her game was undistinguished and free from devious tricks or wild gambles. My own is orthodox, too. I'm merely noting the less artful nature of this girl of half my age. Her chance came in the third game to force me to sacrifice, if she could be reasonably sure of her calculations. As she concentrated on the alternate moves, I watched her, though in a moment she screened her brow with her hand, and I could no longer see her face. Suddenly the air became heavy. A stillness that almost seemed sound ensued, as if silent black wings beat down upon the air. The telephone went ting, not ringing, but ticking, as these country lines do in a thunderstorm. I looked up at the windows, wondering if a storm were coming, but could see only darkness. Then I saw a face pressed against the L courtyard window, a white face, wide-eyed in terror. It was the face of Eliza Blaine. Breaking my gaze from this onlookers, I turned in amazement to the girl across the checkerboard. Her face was utterly alien, an abominable satyr's mask, looking in cool, sardonic amusement at its counterpart's features pressed so fearfully against the window pane. I think that I did the right thing at last. I ran to the outer L door and threw it open upon the courtyard. Switching on the outdoor light, I saw the courtyard was empty, and the impress of no footprints were in the garden plot under the window. I turned back at once to find Oliver Orne just catching the fainting Eliza. I think I did right, I say, because if I had turned and slapped the face or shaken the shoulders of the creature across the checkerboard from me, there'd be danger of psychic trauma for Eliza, with negative results as far as the poltergeist went. June 12th, 1949. This morning I visited Chadwick, telling him what appears here. His advice to me was, "Your best bet is to find some action which will fit all the various theories about poltergeists, since you're concerned with sure counteraction rather than theorizing. You must apply this action when the poltergeist is dominant, and in such a way that Eliza is done neither bodily nor mental harm. You must surprise the poltergeist, confronting him as strongly as possible at the moment of his greatest aggression, and you must do so with something as opposite in all respects as possible." I agreed, and we concocted, rejected, and sorted over a number of possible plans. Finally, we hit upon 2 or 3 schemes which seem more substantial, if they can be worked out. I do not propose to report on them now, as they may never be tested. Since one of them involved the services of a skilled dental technician friend, I spent the rest of the day with him in the hospital laboratory. June 15th, 1949. Fortunately, no manifestations took place while I was completing a variety of preparations to cover as many contingencies as I could. Today I brought back the acrylic plastic candlestick which my dental technician had produced, using his false teeth manufacture thus divertedly. It was a curious piece, anything but artistic, with shapeless, top-heavy bulges. Remarking upon its amateurish appearance and saying that I could do better with more practice, I put the object on the mantel with my tobacco jar and smoking apparatus. Since it seemed highly improbable that the poltergeist would appear in the presence of any object which it knew to be inimical, I hoped that this candlestick would not appear so. It had been a hot day, with thunder showers likely to break the oppressively muggy air. Shortly after supper, I was standing up, filling my pipe, as is my custom. I was reaching for a wooden match from the wall receptacle, and idly looking into the mirror in front of me. My gaze rested on the image of Eliza, or what displaced it. The face was turned as she talked to Mrs. Orne, but the mirror reflected the abhorrent satyr's head, self-confident with the myriad abominations of hell itself. As I watched, Eliza, or this horror, saw me staring at the mirror and broke into a sardonian smile. I turned from the mirror to Eliza. Her features were nearly normal, though the alterations were even now taking place, as if challenging me for my looking-glass view. I was not idle either, for the time had come. And yet my mind continued turning over the matter of mirrors, the lore of the speculum of Mage Merlin, the devil's looking-glass of Dr. Lee, of catoptromancy and vampirism. I had picked up the candlestick, and advanced slowly, with a show of irresolution, to the stove. Doctors and acrobats, bullfighters and actors must have a sense of timing. It is often extremely important. Here, the poltergeist must think me uncertain, or bent upon hurting Eliza, at which misdirected aim he could laugh, exult, and grow stronger. So I advanced to the store as the transformation, unabated, reached its completion. Mr. and Mrs. Orne sat still as I lifted the lid of the hot kettle. I had to trust them to heed my injunction not to stir. Then the lights went out. The electricity in this part of the country sometimes does cut out when there are thunderstorms, but this was too opportune to be chance. From Eliza's figure sprouted mushroom blobs of static light like St. Elmo's fires, shining yet not igniting, forming at the hem of her skirt, her waist, the nape of her neck, swamp fire of the fiend's finding. With the room thus weirdly illumined, the poltergeist held both hands aloft with palms taut and fingers radiating, outstretched to the area above my head. Shrilly, Eliza's strained vocal cords emitted the fiend's curses and evocations. All around me stones fell, yet I was unhurt. I drew from the kettle the acrylic plastic figure. The action of the boiling water had fulfilled our anticipations by invoking the peculiar properties of the candlestick's substances, reshaping it into the form of a crucifix. As I walked forward with the talisman upraised, the demoniac creature emitted a hell-rending cry, as if a bottomless pit gaped beneath him. His hands lowered spasmodically to clutch idiotically about his face. His features withered and writhed, revealed as the electricity came on again, when, presumably, the fiend's willpower dissolved its damning block. In a moment, the struggle was over. Eliza, released, collapsed into her chair, and but for my free hand would have fallen to the floor. June 15th, 1949. Chadwick explains the matter by calling the poltergeist a virulent mass, and the crucifix an all-healing antibiotic, which is an interesting way of putting it. Since the crucifix was dormant in the plastic, the acrylic being peculiar in that once fixed in the form of a crucifix, it could be provisionally altered to the rough shape of a candlestick until its memory was stirred by the boiling water. When it reverted to its fixed shape, it could form a perfect opposite to the poltergeist. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,